What happens when a wilderness icon loses everything he stood for? Not his freedom, but his identity. Joshua Brown from Alaskan Bush People didn't just face a sentence. He faced a life-changing exile that could redefine what it means to be a Brown. From courtroom shocks to family fallout and secrets the cameras never showed, this story goes way deeper than anyone expected. Stay with us, because what Joshua lost may be something none of them can ever get back. The Brown family carved out a legend in the wilds of Alaska, far from city lights and paved roads. But no one could have predicted the storm now bearing down on Joshua "Bam Bam" Brown. Fans who followed his journey from bush-born survivalist to reality TV icon are now confronted with a stark new chapter, one laced not with wilderness drama, but with the cold finality of courtroom sentencing. As the cameras that once framed him against majestic snowy peaks now fade to black, another lens captures a very different reality. Joshua's world has shifted, not from nature's wrath, but from the gravity of man-made consequences. This is not just about a legal battle. It's about a life unraveling, thread by thread, in front of a nation that once cheered him on. Years ago, Joshua stood as a symbol of quiet strength among his more impulsive siblings. While others scrambled, he thought things through. While tempers flared, he calmed the storm. That made him relatable, even admirable. But now, with sentencing finalized and the truth laid bare, many wonder, how did someone raised in a world of values and self-reliance end up here? Before headlines and accusations, there was only the forest. Joshua was born into a world where survival wasn't a metaphor. It was a way of life. While his peers were mastering math problems, he was mastering the art of lighting fires in the snow. His father, Billy Brown, believed in self-governance, in a life unchained from the modern grind. That spirit ran deep in Joshua's veins. So when television crews arrived in 2014, ready to document a quirky Bush family, what they captured was something more. A bond forged through hardship. A resilience that went far beyond what most people could imagine. Joshua was never the loudest. He was the one you watched for his quiet resolve, for the way he made the hard choices seem effortless. That kind of presence earns loyalty. But being in the public eye also meant something else. Your life wasn't your own anymore. Every decision became a spectacle. Every misstep became a headline. And somewhere between authenticity and performance, the lines blurred in ways even the Browns couldn't foresee. What began as whispers turned into a formal investigation. Authorities scoured documents, flight logs, receipts, and more. Between 2009 and 2012, investigators found the Browns spent considerable time outside of Alaska, too much time to qualify for the payments they received. The amount was modest, $20,000 in total for the family. But for prosecutors, this wasn't about the money. It was about the trust the program was built on. And that trust, in their eyes, had been broken. For Joshua, it was worse. He wasn't a minor following a parent's lead. He was an adult, independently signing off on paperwork that certified year-round residency. Multiple years, multiple signatures. All while his feet were reportedly planted far from Alaskan soil. The paperwork bore his name. The promises of residency bore his word. And when investigators matched those documents with television episodes and time-stamped images from other states, the weight of evidence became hard to ignore. His defense echoed a familiar refrain. Joshua wasn't raised to understand red tape. He was taught to follow family and honor their path. If he signed, it was because he trusted his father. But prosecutors countered with facts, dates, places, signatures. No matter the intention, the result was the same. Funds collected by someone who no longer legally qualified. And in a system that hinges on personal honesty, this was a breach that couldn't be ignored. When Joshua entered the courthouse in 2016, the contrast couldn't have been more jarring. Gone were the leather boots and rough coats of the bush. In their place, a stiff suit and polished shoes. The wilderness man, suddenly a defendant. Billy stood beside him, but the silence between them hinted at something deeper. Tension, regret, maybe even blame. For once, it wasn't nature trying to break them. It was the law. The judge listened carefully. The courtroom felt frozen in time as prosecutors made their case with clinical precision. They weren't dealing with naive newcomers, they argued, but with seasoned adults who had misrepresented their lives to collect funds meant for struggling residents. Joshua's attorney painted a picture of a man shaped by isolation, raised to trust kin above all. He wasn't a schemer, he was a son, one who had placed his faith in his father's guidance. That argument resonated emotionally, but legally it fell short. As prosecutors revealed images of Joshua in California and Washington during times he swore he lived in Alaska, the room seemed to tighten. The defense's story, while heartfelt, couldn't erase the timeline. When asked directly, Joshua said, "Alaska was always our home. Even when we weren't there physically, it never left our hearts." It was a powerful statement, genuine, nostalgic, and full of the longing so many fans had admired in him for years. But emotional truth doesn't always align with legal standards. And now, facing sentencing, Joshua Brown stands at a crossroads. Not just between freedom and consequences, but between the man he was and the man he must now become. One thing is clear. This is not just a reckoning for Joshua. It's a turning point for the entire Brown family legacy. The room had fallen into a hush, thick with the weight of what was coming next. As the final piece of evidence was entered, Joshua Brown, a man whose name had become synonymous with the wild, off-grid dream, shut his eyes, as if bracing for impact. The narrative that once enchanted viewers across America now stood in ruins, replaced by cold facts that couldn't be denied. For a man who once seemed untouchable in the wilderness, the moment felt like the final snap of a frozen tree limb in a harsh Alaskan winter. Seconds stretched as the judge gathered his notes. You could feel the tension coiling through the air. Billy Brown stood beside his son, their faces a portrait of weathered silence. This was more than a court decision. It was a reckoning. The judge's voice cut through the stillness like a distant thunderclap. Charges of falsifying residency documents and submitting fraudulent applications echoed through the room. The story that had captivated millions, about a family living off the land in one of the harshest environments on Earth, was now revealed to be incomplete, and the missing pieces carried legal consequences. The travel logs, the bank activity from states far removed from Alaska, the testimony of those who'd seen the Browns elsewhere when they claimed to be home in the bush, it all formed an airtight case. The ruling landed like a stone dropped in still water. Joshua Brown was guilty. The young man who had once battled the elements in front of the cameras was now up against a different kind of force, unforgiving, methodical, and steeped in accountability. You could almost hear the dreams fracture in that courtroom. The irony cut deep. For years, Joshua's image had stood for raw authenticity, for a life stripped of the artificial. But now, the judge's words exposed a painful contradiction. The sentence was deliberate and final: 30 days in jail. No shortcuts, no early exit. For someone who had lived under open skies, in endless forests, this wasn't just incarceration. It was exile from everything he believed defined him. As the judge detailed the punishment, the symbolism struck home. This wasn't only about money, it was about trust. Joshua had to repay roughly $8,000, plus mounting fines that ballooned the total beyond $10,000. For a family that once relied on trapping and ingenuity to survive, that figure meant more than just digits on a page. It echoed loudly through their simple cabins and frozen mornings. More than a financial burden, it was a formal acknowledgement that the life they portrayed wasn't always what it seemed. And yet, the sentence kept digging deeper. 40 hours of community service were tacked on, a condition not for punishment, but for redemption. In a way, it felt like a small bridge back to the people of Alaska, whom he had let down. It demanded Joshua physically return and face the place that had once embraced him. That hook alone left people wondering, would the wilderness forgive him? But then came the sentence's final twist. The piece that sent a quiet wave of shock even through seasoned courtroom observers. Joshua was banned, permanently, from ever receiving Alaska's dividend payments again. That wasn't just a punishment, it was a branding. A permanent exclusion from a tradition that symbolized shared ownership of the land. While other penalties would fade with time, this one would stretch into the horizon with him. Legal experts were quick to note the rarity of such a decision. Permanent bans were usually reserved for repeat offenders or unusually serious cases. In this instance, it was as though the judge was trying to make a statement, not just to Joshua, but to anyone watching, that your legacy, no matter how romanticized, won't protect you from consequences. When the camera panned to Joshua, there was no dramatic outburst, no denial, just a flicker across his face. A quiet, almost haunting look of acceptance. The kind of expression you might see on a man watching the tide erase his footprints. A wilderness survivor facing a new kind of frontier, one where maps can't guide you and instincts might not be enough. The courtroom began to stir as officers prepared to escort both Joshua and Billy into custody. And in that tiny pocket of time, Joshua turned to his mother, Amora. The exchange between them, barely audible, felt sacred. It was a flicker of humanity untouched by cameras, unrehearsed, and quietly devastating. Some moments can't be scripted. This was one of them. As the handcuffs clicked shut, you could feel the finality settle in the air. The man once known for charting his own path was now led away under someone else's rules. But perhaps the most haunting part wasn't what happened inside the courtroom. It was what followed outside of it. The fallout didn't end with Joshua. It tore through the Brown family like a glacier carving through rock. Back at Browntown, their makeshift paradise felt the absence immediately. Joshua's absence created more than a logistical vacuum. It left a personal void. His mechanical know-how had kept their fragile ecosystem running. Without him, their boat, vital for both transport and survival, fell into disrepair. The generator sputtered to a halt on frigid nights, and repairs that used to be quick fixes turned into prolonged breakdowns. Bear, always eager but impulsive, tried to step in. But what he brought in energy, he lacked in strategy. Noah's ideas, while sometimes brilliant, often hovered somewhere between genius and chaos. Tasks that had once run like clockwork now dragged on, unfinished and unraveling. Even emotionally, the family structure buckled. Joshua had quietly played the role of anchor, the unspoken stabilizer between his more erratic brothers. Now, without him, everything felt off-kilter. Arguments flared more often. Frustration simmered just beneath the surface, and the pressure to carry on their lives and their public image only intensified. What had started as a legal case had mutated into a family-wide reckoning. The wilderness had tested them before, but this trial had nothing to do with snowstorms or hunger. Behind Amora, Ami Brown's weathered smile lay a growing storm. Already carrying the weight of hidden health challenges that would later surface publicly, she now faced a cruel reality. Her family's foundation was trembling. Billy, her lifelong partner in carving out a life on their terms, had been pulled into the same legal spiral that now defined Joshua's future. The very structure they'd built to shield their children from the outside world's chaos was now being undone from within. Observers who caught glimpses between camera takes noticed her thinning frame and the increasing frequency of those long, worried stares she gave Billy during discussions about Joshua. For someone who had faced off with nature's wrath in the Alaskan wilderness, this new storm, silent, systemic, inescapable, proved far more dangerous. Rain and Snowbird, once free spirits roaming the forest floor with abandon, now found themselves navigating an entirely different terrain, one made of headlines, judgment, and digital vitriol. For Rain, it all became too much. She deactivated her social media accounts after a surge of biting comments about her brother's situation. Snowbird, on the other hand, retreated the only way she knew how: back into the woods. Days passed without contact, her absence unnoticed only by those unfamiliar with her need for solitude. But this time, her silence was less about peace and more about escape. Then came the financial dominoes. Legal fees had already carved deep into the family's savings, even before a sentence was handed down. With Joshua and Billy sidelined, income streams dried up rapidly. The show's filming schedule was thrown into disarray. Some segments were shot around Joshua's absence entirely, but for devoted fans, the holes in the storyline were unmistakable. The very narrative the show had thrived on, resilience, unity, and wilderness survival, was crumbling under legal pressure. And just as producers scrambled to hold the show's momentum, Discovery Channel was left reeling. Their longtime partnership with the Browns was now under scrutiny. Would audiences still tune in, knowing the truth? Could sponsors justify their ongoing support? Behind closed doors, executives debated whether this was a temporary setback or the start of a reputation they could no longer control. Because for a brand built on authenticity, any trace of deception, however unintentional, was poison. Property taxes on their expansive land holdings came due, and for the first time, the family couldn't just pull together to pay them. Ideas were floated, selling timber, crafting artisan goods, but each plan stumbled over a logistical snag that pointed back to Joshua. The family's economy, informal but efficient, had always depended on everyone playing their role, and now the absence of one created imbalance for all. Locals, once respectful of the family's off-the-grid lifestyle, started approaching their property with phones raised and questions sharp as daggers. Bam Bam had always played the role of the diplomatic middleman, keeping the world's chaos at bay. But without his calming presence, the family's buffer zone thinned dangerously. Strangers began treating their pain as a spectacle, feeding a media machine hungry for headlines. And headlines they got. Wilderness star sentenced. From cabin to courtroom. The downfall of Joshua Brown. Every outlet had its own take, but all shared a certain gleeful irony. Clips of Joshua braving the elements were now contrasted with courthouse footage, soundtracked by dramatic voiceovers. Legal pundits offered armchair analysis while fans wrestled with betrayal. Was this still the family they'd rooted for all these years? Public opinion fractured sharply. Some viewers denounced the Browns, wondering what else about their wilderness lifestyle had been curated. Others, fiercely loyal, insisted the family's love for each other and the land remained authentic. Discovery Channel issued a strategic but neutral statement, acknowledging the facts but doubling down on their support for the show. Meanwhile, the Browns fell into a collective hush. No social posts, no interviews, just silence. And in that silence, speculation bloomed. Rumors filled the void like weeds in untended soil. What were they hiding? What would happen next? But it was Joshua's own reckoning that proved most powerful. The words "goodbye forever" weren't just part of a sentencing, they became a scar. Being banned from Alaska's dividend program severed more than financial assistance. It tore away his sense of identity. That check, modest as it was, had always symbolized something deeper. A belonging, a shared destiny with the land and its people. Losing it felt like being erased from a place that had raised him. In private moments behind bars, Joshua turned to journaling. He filled page after page with thoughts on belonging, purpose, and the meaning of home. "If I can't return to where I became me," one entry read, "then who am I now? It wasn't confinement that haunted him, it was being cast out. And as the family processed their pain, viewers at home were left with questions. Would Joshua recover his place, not just in Alaska, but within himself? Could the Browns rebuild their image without erasing the past? Or had the wilderness they'd once conquered turned against them? So what now? For the Browns, silence is both a shield and a strategy. For fans, it's a challenge. And for Joshua, it's a test of self. When the wilderness you love no longer welcomes you, can you find home somewhere else? Or must you build a new one from scratch? So Joshua's journey shows how family, fame, and fortune can shift fast. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. More untold Hollywood stories are coming your way. Stay wild, stay true,